It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. In one of the recent workshops that I was teaching, I got put on the spot and someone asked me about the difference between ITIL and Agile and are they compatible? And I'll start by saying this. Many people in the Agile workspace say that these two don't always play nice together in a sandbox, but the truth is, they're certainly not enemies either. While it might sound like they're opposites because ITIL has a very strict process and set of process control, when you're working in IT service management, these two actually do work together. This concept could be termed or coined as Agile Service Management. So let's talk about Agile Service Management for a moment. Agile Service Management means applying the Agile mindset to IT service management. It's really that simple. But sometimes this is not something that people have commonly done. It's not something that is an everyday thing, at least for most organizations. And it's not because it's wrong, it's just because it almost sounds too simple to work. I know that sounds crazy. But at first sight, Agile sounds like it's the opposite, and people often just shun it. But the truth is, if you think about some of the things that stands for, you can make minor pivots or adjustments, and really include or accommodate IT service management. In fact, one of the things that I often hang my hat on is the concept of implementing more of a Scrum-Bon approach to this, because I think that if you're just doing pure Scrum, it really is a hard fit or a hard sell. But if you're doing more of a Scrum slash Kanban, or even leaning in more heavily towards Kanban, it becomes a better fit. So if you think about the beginning of Agile, so let's talk about the Agile Manifesto. The Agile methodology is based on four core values. The first one is individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software services over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And I think that while in ITIL, we need to understand that there's some things that are more strict, I don't think that it restricts us from being able to use an agile approach to accommodate IT service management. So, when following an agile service management approach, the first thing you need to do is understand those preordained principles and talk about how it applies to designing and delivering services. For example, within an ITIL framework, there are some things that you definitely need to consider if you're trying to think about agile as part of it. ITIL's kind of been considered the gold standard of IT, kind of like the PMP was the gold standard for product management for a long time, or project management. I till now, in many sets of eyes, is considered an old school approach to most current service management environments. Many people would even say it's no longer suitable to build a business landscape, especially if it's relating to ITSM. There's evidence in the fact that you can have an ITIL update in which practical guidance on how ITIL is to be adopted in conjunction with Agile should and was included and has been updated regularly to talk about how these play together. So, if you think of Agile Service Management, which is what I'm describing, versus ITIL, the question comes, is it possible to pair Agile Service Management with ITIL? If you look at those four basic values from the Agile Manifesto and try to compare that with ITIL, you'll immediately notice how some of those may play opposite from one another. ITIL attaches great significance to everything that the Agile mindset believes to be less important. Individuals and interactions take precedence over processes and tools in an Agile world. The 2001 manifesto is very clear about that. But if you look at ITIL, it focuses almost on exclusively on process descriptions and systems with the goal of creating quality of services offered. But here's the catch. In an everything as a service environment world, more specifically, who supplies the service should and does not matter from a customer perspective. There's also the fact that ITIL prefers comprehensive documentation. Additionally, ITIL guidelines fill 5 books with 1,300 pages meant to explain the 26 components of ITIL version 3. Of course, you don't have to read and follow all the ITIL process, but needless to say, providing services within the Agile framework could be a lot less cumbersome. So I think what you need to do is focus on each of these and figure out how ITIL ties to Agile. For example, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Contractual agreements are an important part of ITIL service level agreements, and creating SLAs is a primary goal that many organizations face, where managers and customers judge outcomes based on those agreements. It's clear to see when compared to an agile environment that SLAs for an SLA can, for the sake of an SLA, it could typically get in the way. And if that's the only parameter for measurement of success, in an agile environment, you're going to see things a little differently. It's key in an agile environment to make sure that your service level agreement is there for the right reason to help you fulfill customers' expectations. What's interesting is when you start thinking ITIL and you think the customer doesn't care, they should care. And you don't necessarily need to convince the customer that they should care, but you should provide a service that the customer cares about. The easiest way for me to summarize this is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think if you frame it that way, it makes a lot of sense. How about this one? Responding to changeover following a plan. ITIL means heavy planning, preparing for, and responding with predictable processes based on the idea that solutions can be executed according to the way it should be handled when problems arise. The problem with ITIL is that it can box you in so tightly that you're unable to divert from the plan should a need arise. It's kind of a permanency. So the permanency of ITIL can just be too airtight, watertight, leaving very little way to deviate or to switch course from the original pre-programmed plan, which is the pure definition of a non-agile environment. That's probably the most heard argument that's holding back traditional IT oriented organizations from moving to be more agile. The truth is, you need a balance. And I'll tell you firsthand, here I go. I think that both ends of the pendulum have swung too far in the opposite directions. While agile may have been too loosey goosey here, I think that ITIL has really been too rigid of an approach. And it locks it into becoming a process instead of a framework. So if you think about it from those perspectives, you know, there's definitely a framework versus a process, but I'm going to take it one step further because I don't necessarily believe that ITIL is as rigid a process as people think. I think what it boils down to is framework versus culture, framework versus philosophy. ITIL certainly is not the match made in heaven at first sight. But the truth is, if you've ever heard someone say opposites attract, this is a definite case of opposites attract. There are agile principles that help you make decisions and help you engage, but it doesn't necessarily dictate how you complete specific tasks. There's not necessarily a roadmap, just guidelines. ITIL is a perfect collection of procedures to help describe how you're going to execute your work in detail, a set of templates and ideas. But the truth is, ITIL has a reputation for being rigid and unnecessarily complex. But ITIL was never meant to be the starting point. So if you think about it from a perspective of four main components to deliver any product or service, which is ideation, right? Where we come up with a good idea and we talk about that idea. It's very inexpensive and it's the first step. Hey, I got a good idea. Let's throw a little money at it and vet out and make sure it's a good idea. The second phase is discovery. And this is where you're doing all the discovery about the product or service and identifying the target personas and mapping using story mapping, journey mapping, network mapping, whatever's necessary in order to make sure that you're validating and proving that this idea is indeed practical, that it works out and it's essential and it's something we should build. Then you go into the delivery. And when you step into that delivery phase, whether you're doing DevOps, DevSecOps, strict ITIL, this is where you need to really pay attention because this can give you keys to help you implement and templatize and come up with solutions that are going to be better. And then finally, the last stage is delivery, the last stage is release. And this is where you're going to release it to your consumer. So once you're finished with your delivery, how am I going to get that product or service to my end consumer? And what I can tell you is that if you think in those four frames of reference, it actually puts ITIL in a pretty good position to fit in with Agile and to play nicely in a sandbox. But I think it does require you to take one step back, think outside of the box, and figure out how you frame up work, how that work is adjusted, whether or not you need extensive heavy documentation, and how you can implement ITIL into your Agile framework. Tell you what, that was a long one, but it's going to do it. If you have questions or more questions about how ITIL works and how you can use Agile inside of your IT processes and your IT groups, we have worked a ton with IT and infrastructure groups, including data center restructures and refreshes, brand new data center creation, cloud creation. All of these things have Agile nuances, and you can certainly work within your current system and use an Agile way of thinking to get things accomplished. If you want to learn more, reach out to us at learnmore@agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.